All right. Can everyone see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, thank you. So let's see. I might have to mute someone really quickly. If I mute you and you have any questions, if you want to throw them in the chat or raise your hand, I'll go ahead and do that. So what I wanted to do is, for anybody that wasn't on the office hours in the last few weeks, take you to our website and just show you where the full grant guidelines are so you can get to them in two different spots. There's a link from the webinars and Zoom trainings, or you could go directly to our resource documents, go to our grants, and the grant guidelines are right here. And today, what I thought, so Haley did a great job the last 2 weeks going through these in depth. But there was a request to look at the submittable form itself and provide a form to you all so that you could work on that prior to putting it right into submittable. And so what I focused on was looking at this section, the scope of work onwards, and including some areas into a form all the way up to the budget. So Haley did a great job of also pointing out that we have a budget sheet that you can use. So there's some great tools here, but I'll go back to where I have this form. So I asked Catherine to put the planning form right here. And let's see. This form is actually developed from the submittable application. And let's see, we'll open it up here. And I emailed it out to you all before the office hours. And today I thought I'd just go over it broadly and then fill out an example. But I do want to point out that there's some great tools and resources already here. So if you feel a little overwhelmed or you haven't done this before, I would definitely encourage you to look at this webinar here, Developing a Scope of Work. It's about 50 minutes and they talk about how to write good objectives. Another great one is Successful Grant Writing 101. There's a PDF here. It's also 50 minutes and they talk about, you know, how to write good goals, objectives, and tasks. And then this form, my thought process with this form is that it's a one-pager and you can definitely copy and paste from here into submittable, but it's a form you could print off and potentially take to your board meetings and actually have your board members help you with the level of detail that is needed for a project. And that was the thought process behind this planning form. That being said, you know, you might need more space. You might need to have a few extra pages, for example, for the project management part. But it's a starting point, and I thought it'd be a great form for doing some brainstorming. So does anyone have any questions about those resources or where to get them? Okay, so oh, do I have a question? No, okay. And I'll do my best.
Yeah, Veronica, I'm sorry, I was just fumbling with my mouse. This is in PDF format. Is there also one available in Word format? So if we did want to expand those areas, is that available as well?
Yep, and I emailed it out
Okay.
to all of the administrators. We could put the Word, and that was a thought I had, to have both versions, but we could put the Word version on the website as well. Yeah,
I'm looking. I just didn't scroll down far enough on my email. I apologize.
Nope, that's totally fine. Some people, I think, like the fillable PDFs, but I actually was going to use the Word version just because of space. What this will do is it'll shrink it, but if you're going to take it to a board meeting, you might want more space, so you print off the Word version. So yeah, in those webinars, as I mentioned, they go over what a goal is, what an objective is. And for today, I was just going to do a quick review of that, work through this sheet, and then open it up to discussion. And in the grant guidelines, there's examples of what you can include in each section as well. So the first part, I think, of any project is the need. So obviously, if you're doing a project, you have an identified need. And I think, how do you identify a need as a conservation district? One of the ways you can do that is through your local work group. Obviously, that's kind of the intent. You identify a need in the community, but it's not the only way. You could potentially do other outreach. You could have input from partners. For example, NRCS will have a long-range plan for your county with different resource concerns, and they probably, you know, they have tips in your county potentially. So you could identify a need that way. Certainly at board meetings, you know, things come up. So the need is the first step, but how you come about that is not necessarily one way. Like I said, the local work group is a great way to do that. Then from your need, you're going to go to your goal. So your goal is broad, general, but it's your vision, your end goal, your solution to that need. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind is being realistic. And that can mean a lot of different things. So, you know, being realistic about what you can achieve in your community, being realistic financially, being realistic, just in terms of, I think, natural resources is something that we, you know, we can sometimes think that we can achieve these great things. And I've written tips, and you think you're going to do something and it doesn't quite go that way. But the more realistic you are with your goal, the more, I think, likely you are to be successful. And that is something, when you're writing a goal, I would think about, do you think it'll be successful? And maybe that's something, if you go to your board and you've identified your need and you have a solution in mind, maybe that's a question you discuss. Do we think we could really be successful with this? So your goal is broad, general, and then from your goal, you get more specific to your objectives. So, and I know some of you have a lot of familiarity with this, you know, writing grant applications, and some of you may be more new, but there's something we call SMART with objectives. So it's an acronym, and it starts for, or it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And you want to really write your objectives with those things in mind. So when we work through the example, I will write kind of how I wrote through this example. And then I had to go back and go, well, was I actually being very timely or specific or even measurable? And that's, you know, when you're working through this, that's the level of detail you want to get before you put it into your submittable application. But it may not happen the first time, I guess, is my point. So from your goals and objectives, you actually could go straight to your tasks. Now, the way I did this form, I pulled all of this from submittable, but there's not really an order. So for example, you might write a little bit in your need, go to your goals, work on your objectives, go to your tasks, then think about, why are you doing this? Obviously, if you're doing a summary, you're probably going to work through this form and go back and add more to your summary. So definitely, this wasn't really necessarily put in a specific order, but I was trying to put it in a way that you're thinking through these things and it kind of flows. So from goals to objectives, you come to your tasks, and tasks are really what they sound like. They're just specific actions that you're going to do to accomplish your objectives, and then, you know, taking it up to your goal or goals. You know, you may have one goal for your project, you may have a couple, but that's how it goes. So as an acronym, you could think of like, you got this, GOT. I didn't put that in a slide because I didn't want to do slides, but that's the natural progression. And then from your tasks, you have your deliverables. So deliverables can be a lot of different things. In the grant guidelines, there's examples, but really, when you're thinking of a deliverable, they're usually task related. So when you're writing your tasks, you want to think about, what is my deliverable? And what is a deliverable? It's your output. It's a product. Not always, but it can be a process, but it's often a product. So like, is it, a publication? Is it a flyer? Is it photos? Deliverables are going to be what determines if you were successful. At the same time, when you're thinking of this, these are things you'd be submitting to us to show that your project was successful. So with your DNRC reporting, if you get this grant, you want to think of, okay, what kind of deliverables can I give to DNRC as well? And that's the best way, I think, to think about deliverables. And then you get to this, I think it's a really small box for its purpose, but I did want to do one page with this to kind of give us a starting point. But your project management, so who's going to do what? Probably there's going to be partners involved. Really big partner could be landowners. You don't want to forget about them. Potentially NRCS, potentially other partners. You want to list also what the CD is going to be doing throughout the project. And then I combined within submittable, you have a box for who and you have when. So you could potentially split this out. You could write it together and then tease it out, but a schedule. So, when you're thinking these things are going to get done. And then at the end of this form, I actually put something that's not in submittable. I was taking a project management course and this came up. What are some assumptions you're making about your project and some challenges? And I think if you work through this form and you get to this part and you start really thinking about this, this can really help inform maybe some changes that you need to make above. So what are some obstacles you could face? What are the risks? And I think if you really work at this, it increases your chances of being successful. If you don't think about any of the obstacles, your project, it could be successful, but I think oftentimes we miss some things we should have thought about when we were planning it. So that's the thought process of this tool. And like I said, I would print it off, work through it, and then potentially come back to it and work on it some more. And I'll talk at the end about some writing resources, and then you could potentially copy and paste into submittable. So does anyone have any questions before I jump into an example? If you have more questions, like I said, there's some great webinars, and don't feel like you can't reach out to us and ask, if you fill out this form and you want me to look at it, it's a really neat way for me to get your ideas from you, and then I can really get some feedback to you about things that you might want to add. Okay. All right. Well, I came up with an example that is familiar to me, but I don't want to scare anyone. Projects, it's really hard to come up with a project that fits everywhere. I've tried to make it a little more complicated and tricky to kind of give you some ideas of things that can happen. But certainly it doesn't mean you have to go to do a project like this. I just wanted to clarify that so that no one freaks out. But I'll jump right into the example. And one thing I would say is if you have any questions or you want to discuss something as I go, that's what this is for. And then, yeah, certainly at the end, if there's more questions, we'll stay on. So for my example, I'm just going to talk through this as though I am you guys. I attend a local work group meeting and I start to hear about things that are going on in my county. And one thing that comes up is soil health. And specifically in my county, everyone's really concerned about the soil health on their cropland. So, people are noticing that they need more fertilizer for the same amount of yields. They are noticing more pests. Salinity is becoming an issue. And so the need that I hear is that people want to improve their soil health on their cropland. So maybe I write at a local work group meeting, the identified need org, right? A need that was identified was improving soil health on cropland. And maybe specifically we focus on dryland cropland. So that's a need that I could put in that box. And potentially at the local work group meeting, potentially at other meetings, we talk to your board and we think about things, we talk to our partners, and we decide that the way we want to address this is through cover crops. So we've read a lot about cover crops, the CSP program, people are doing cover crops. But what we're finding is that people will do cover crops for CSP and then they will stop doing them, or there's not long-term implementation. We start thinking about, well, what is something that we could do? And so maybe you jump down to this box and you say a goal is we do want to improve soil health on dryland cropland in our county. And we want to do that through grazing of cover crops. We've attended some Gabe Brown workshops, and yeah, we want to really target that because we think that that could move the needle. You've probably heard that expression a lot. So that's what maybe our goal is. And so you come to your board meeting, you're working on this project idea, and the next step is to talk about your objectives. So how are you going to do that? You want to get really specific. So first step is probably we want to help some landowners purchase cover crop seed. Sounds great. And then how are they going to graze them? Well, we talk to folks, and maybe at your board meeting they say, well, we need to put some infrastructure out there. And so something comes up, maybe we want to help them purchase electric fence materials so that they can strip graze. So that's a good objective. But then we're also thinking, well, maybe something that's missing is education. Maybe landowners don't really know what to do with their cover crops. They sign up, they've heard about them, they put them out, put them on their fields, and then they're just stuck with, well, how do you even graze this? So maybe we want to provide some education. Really great objectives. Or are they? So I started thinking about this. Yeah, we're brainstorming. We really want to get specific. We want to get measurable. We want to get achievable. We want to focus on our results, and we want to be timely. So maybe we work on this. One great way to write objectives, I think, is to add the phrase resulting in, but we also want to measurable, right? So we want to think about how many acres. Remember, quantifiable outcomes. It's in our grant guidelines. This is what we're looking for in our applications. Now, how do you come up with acres? You want to really sit down and think. I would say the first step is to talk maybe with some partners, maybe at your board meeting, but ultimately I also think when you work through this form and move to your budget, that might make you come back and really be more realistic about how many acres you can impact. So I'll just put X acres, and then we want to put broadly when we want to do this. We'll work through a schedule later on, but you want to include that in the objective as well. And then this is where I would put resulting in. So you want to tie your objective to your goal. So resulting in improvement of soil health on affected acres, affected land. Or you just put dry land, cropland. Same thing with fence materials on X acres in year one, resulting in further improvement. So we can talk a little bit about this. Why would you want to do, why would you want two different objectives? So potentially, this could be our standalone objective and we may not even worry about grazing, but for some reason we're talking about grazing. So we look at our soil health principles and we realize, yeah, integrating livestock might actually move the needle even further. And so maybe you want to do less acres here or different acres, do a comparison, see, does the cover crop itself move the needle? Do we need to also think about grazing? I mean, these are things you can discuss and think through, but it's just throwing different ideas out here. And then providing educational opportunities, you want to get specific about what those would be. So if you want to do a workshop on just grazing cover crops, you know, you might not want to be so broad and just do grazing. You might not want to just do cover crops. You might want to make it very specific to your project. And in this case, that's what I probably would do. And then you want to get specific with how many landowners are going to attend. Yeah, so that's kind of a way to work through one goal and a set of objectives. And then you could come back up here and say, you know, this is important because of the two, or of you know, add a little bit of why you're doing what you're doing up here too. Does anyone have any questions so far? I'm just working through this form with an example, but if you have any observations or comments or what you would do, or oh. So I'm going to jump down to the tasks for this hypothetical project and probably would do some planning meetings or one, and maybe you're going to have 2 workshops, maybe just one. Since you're thinking about helping landowners purchase materials and cover crop seed, probably want to develop an application and some ranking criteria. Probably want to provide outreach. That could look like many different things. I've seen postcards, flyers, but that's something you would probably have to do. Then thinking about the technical part of your project, you probably need some cover crop mixes that are suitable for grazing. So you can see how these tasks are really naturally coming from your objectives. Like I said, goal, objectives, tasks, but it's not to say that you can't come up with more tasks as time goes on. It's just you definitely want to cover your objectives pretty clearly with your tasks. And if there are tasks that don't really fit your objectives, it can create a disconnect. So one thing that I saw in that scope of work webinar is it's like a roadmap. You really want to help the grant reviewer get to where you're going, which is ultimately your goal.
Hey, Veronica.
Yep.
One thing that I'll add here that I really like to see in grant applications is that people have remembered to put in a task for reporting and grant closeout.
Oh, yep. I actually was gonna add that at the end, but yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Don't forget to include all the stuff that you need to do for us. So let's add that, Haley. Okay. How should I write that? Complete grant reporting requirements. So looking at my tasks, I start to think about what are some tangible items, some products. Obviously, one I think about is a cover crop mix. Got to come up with that. Fence design packet. Now, I also think when you're talking education, you want to maybe think about how do you show that your workshop was successful. So you could potentially, as a tangible product, have a workshop attendance list that you submit to us. really great one for projects like this, photos. So if you can get before and after photos, in this case of grazed cover crops, you can submit those to us. Now we're talking soil health, so I naturally think soil tests. Yeah, if you can also produce soil tests, that really speaks to that goal. We're talking improving soil health. And there's, potentially, let's see. I get application materials, flyers. There's quite a few more deliverables that can be listed here, but it's just a start for these particular tasks. Actually, let's see, final report. I almost forgot that one. So that's a deliverable, and you can clearly see deliverable is tied to the tasks are tied to my objectives, and my objectives are tied to my goal, and my goal is addressing my need. So for project management, I think this is a really great thing to discuss at board meetings, because your supervisors are going to have a really good sense of, I think, a good sense of time, for example, with a workshop, when people can attend a workshop. So for example, say you apply September, in this grant cycle, you're awarded, you get a contract in March. So perhaps you start developing application materials. Good grief. Maybe you have really quick turnaround, April 2023. And then you really want to get your education done, because you want people to be educated before they start implementing things. So maybe you work with NRCS and you put on a workshop, and you start talking to folks, talk at your board meeting, and well, everyone's calving in April. Maybe we aim for a quick workshop in March. And I'll rework this a little bit, but this is just, as I was working through it, I was thinking, when do you do what? So then you want your landowners that were awarded funding to seed their cover crops. And I'm going to get real NRCSC June 15th. This is the level of detail we like to see, because when I come back to this, you'll see how by thinking through the timeline, I start to realize, I don't know if we can do this in 1 year. But we want them to purchase fence materials, and we want them to do that July, maybe in between haying. And then we want them to document their cover crop stand. So the landowners are your partners in this process. And, if they're not photographing, then that means you have to go out and photograph everything. So by keeping it clear in your mind that they're a partner that needs to also be doing things at a particular time, I think that really helps with your project management. And then so yeah, I have some months, maybe in some cases you have dates. I've seen timelines that are like a whole Word document. I definitely don't want to limit you guys to this one box, but maybe this is great for you to go to a board meeting and just jot things down, and even write on the back. So you're working through this, and most likely I think things are coming up. So one challenge that I came up with right away, and I already mentioned this, is I'm going to put this in capitals: when to have a workshop. I found that it's really hard to find a time here that works. So when I looked at this timeline, I was like, realistically, the only thing that I can see working is probably October, which means that my landowners won't have an educational opportunity prior to when I want them to implement the projects. So maybe instead of year one for this, we might have to think realistically year two. And that's kind of when you work through this, you might come back and say, well, you know, DNRC, we might need more than a year to do this. And that's just the reality of it. So then my timeline would change, you know. Yeah. So that's the challenge you've addressed potentially. I don't know why it's doing this. Huh. Weird. Okay, so then you have a board member who says, cover crops are terrible. My neighbor's cows died. I've heard it. And as a CD, you do want to think about liabilities. So poisoning of livestock. Maybe we go back to our tasks and we say, one thing we really need to do is develop some ironclad agreements that include liability clauses and require landowner responsibility. Remember, they're your partner. Okay, so we've potentially looked at that risk. And then that gets the ball rolling, and another supervisor might say, I hate cover crops because of the weeds. They damage my fences. I've heard that too. So do we want to scrap the project, or do we really want to address that? And maybe, again, we look at landowner responsibility. Maybe we develop another workshop that looks at what you can do in terms of weed management on cover crop stands. I think this box can be really helpful in making your project better. However, you know, potentially there are some challenges and risks and obstacles that maybe this isn't a project you want to do. And that's, you know, part of the planning process as well. So just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, I thought of a really big challenge is we have the fence and the cover crop, but maybe some people don't have water for the cows to graze the cover crop. And, you know, maybe you've worked through your budget, or maybe it's not something you guys want to tackle. So what do? Scrap the project because cows need water. One avenue could be your challenge becomes an opportunity for partnerships. So you look at partners. I don't think NRCS puts water in cropland, but I think, you know, World Wildlife Fund, maybe landowners can build some temporary water or haul water. And you could use that as match. You know, you could take a challenge and potentially turn it into something beneficial. But those are just some that I came up with for this project. So that right there might actually add a new task, and maybe before I even apply, but maybe I want to reach out to partners before I apply, or maybe some point during the project, and see if there's some, you know, other options. I think it would be good before you submit the project, so you could potentially include that as match, but just something to think about. And then I like to fill out this box last, but I almost think it's, you know, as you're talking through it, you might be filling it out as you go, but you're potentially very close to the project by the time you've worked through the form. Your board's maybe close to it, but you want to think about why would you do this project and explain that to the public. And so this could be a really hard section to fill out, but if you think about how could I explain this to somebody who has no familiarity with cover crops, soil health, so, you know, I would start with this project is important because it improves soil on cropland. And maybe we want to include the word directly. Sorry. Maybe we just put wherever you're at, soil is important. So how do you expand this more? Well, I would say you still want to include some more detail. You don't want to, I mean, there's a persuasive element to it, but you want to provide some factual backing for why you think it's important. And you might want to discuss soil health broadly, you know. Explain what you're talking about here. And that's a direct benefit, but I also want you guys to definitely think about indirect benefits. So for this project, you know, one I immediately thought would potentially come up is, well, if we help people graze cover crops, maybe that helps their whole ranch, right? It's not just the cropland. So you could write something like an indirect benefit is increasing the grazing season, thereby improving soil health across rangeland. So you see how your goal was about soil health on cropland, and you could potentially have an indirect benefit on a different land use or different area. Not uncommon, I think, with natural resources and conservation projects. This section right here can really highlight some broad impacts of your project, which could make you more competitive. So that's one thing that we've included in the submittable application that you'll see. Projects that benefit multiple resources, have a lot of indirect benefits, have multiple direct benefits, are going to be more competitive. That's not to say that you can't have a great project that has, you know, a few direct benefits that wouldn't compete well, but it's just something that we've included to really increase the quality of the applications we're getting. And sometimes I think your project may be a really great project and you just don't necessarily think about all these different benefits, which there's a lot to think about actually. And so if you want to send this to me, to Haley, to Mary, we can tease out some information. We can look at it from a different lens and give you some feedback on some things to put in this box. So yeah, that's how I would tackle this form. Does anyone have questions about this example? Anything confusing? Oh, the name. Yeah. I like to name my projects after I've done everything, but I'm going to be honest, I think your project name might change quite a bit as you work through your different goals and objectives. But I think there's something to be said for it being concise, but also providing enough information that someone, you know, if I just put improving soil health on dryland, cropland in a Montana county, yeah, that's great. But, you know, adding a little bit more verbiage can really make your project stand out. Have a chat. Oh. So I mean, this is just how I brainstorm, how I write things. That being said, I wouldn't take this and copy and paste it into submittable. You know, there's obviously grammar wasn't on my mind. There's spelling issues. And so you want to definitely go through spell check. You want to maybe have someone proofread it. probably come back to it, add some more things, but I do want to point out that if you feel, send it to us by all means, but there is a really great webinar here called Writing for Success. And, Heidi again, kind of gives a mini college class. I want to say it's about 15 minutes, and there's I've used the Purdue Online Writing Lab, but she goes through a lot of great things about how to write things, different styles of writing, what you would include, and this is focused on grant writing. So I definitely would encourage you. Another thing is the Little Red Writing Book. I bought this in college, and it helped me with my writing. And I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed or like I'm not a great writer, so I can't do a great project. It's just writing is really important because you could have a great project and we have no clue why it's great or how it's great or what you're going to do. And so that's why it's important to also write clearly and tie things together, and have people review it and provide feedback. And I will tell you, I don't know how many drafts of my college work were covered in red ink, and I certainly look at any feedback I provide is constructive always, and I definitely encourage you guys not to give up. And once you get past the brainstorming, definitely try and clean it up, because that's what I would do. That would be the next step. But send it to us and we'll provide feedback, and probably you'll have a few drafts of this. But yeah, that's probably where I'll leave it at. Hopefully that wasn't too much. I will say, on this planning form, one thing I kind of didn't touch on is when you develop your budget, you might decide, boy, we're going to spend a lot of money on cover crops, so maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we leave that to the CSP program and we focus our money somewhere else. So I see this planning form kind of being a starting point, and as you work on your budget and get feedback from us, you might change significantly the direction you go in. But I think that's just the nature of project planning in general. So that's all I got. If you guys have any questions, there's 15 minutes left. I'll leave this on here. I found a cartoon for project management. Haley, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I put a comment in the chat box, a tip that I learned in college that you were making me think of that helped improve my writing a lot is I read it out loud. Even if I'm just reading it out loud to my dog or, my bored husband or whatever, the act of reading it out loud really helps you hear when you don't have enough detail, when it's awkward, or anytime that it's not gonna like make sense to a reader. And then on that same note, talking about describing the conservation benefits and the public resource benefits, my tip would be to remember that you are writing that to us. You're writing it to Veronica, you're writing it to me, you're writing it to Stephanie or Mary, and you're really kind of stating your case as to what the benefits may be. And even though we know a lot of the resources in Montana, we may not be experts in this particular resource. So write it like we are ignorant and really explain it to us as to why this project matters. So Veronica, on your example, I might even go to even a more basic level and talk about why we care about soil health in the first place, talk about erosion and, crop yields and maintaining farmland for, for open working lands and for future generations and, water quality, things like that.
Yeah, and I honestly struggled with that box because I'm very familiar with the top. I mean, and so it's like, gosh, it's really hard to explain that to someone, who's maybe not familiar. So in that case, I probably would send it to Haley and be like, what do you think? But certainly, yeah, that box is probably the one I think that takes a lot of, thinking about it after the fact, you know, putting it down, coming back to it, maybe having someone else look at it. Because it is true, you know why you need to do this project, but I didn't go to that local work group meeting. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions on the grant guidelines outside of this? Or any other topics? We're here to help you guys, so. Don't want to limit you to just this at all. We will have, I think, office hours next Thursday as well. And I'm not sure what we'll cover next week. I think the budget form, I think you did a really great job last week, Haley, but not
I'm
sure if
curious to
there's,
hear from other folks. I see a few names of people who have been on for multiple office hours now. So, like, what's your input? What do we still need to cover? What are topic ideas for next week's office hours?
there was another section in the submittable form, and maybe if you guys are interested on supporting documents. I don't know if we've covered that in enough detail.
Okay. So Julie Ralston had a comment that we could cover how to submit reports and invoices in submittable. I would preface that with, we are still building out that portion of the project in our submittable account. And I'm not sure that we will quite be ready by next week, but that's a really good topic to keep in mind for a little further down the road.
Is there any interest in MIPA? The checklist? Well, if you guys are interested in any of these topics, definitely reach out. I don't know if I did a really great job or a terrible job.
I think it was great.
I think it was great. Good examples.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't want to overwhelm anyone with this example, but I wanted to show how complicated it can be. And hopefully that means the form can be a useful tool for working through that. Well, I guess I'll stay on. I don't have anything else. Let's see what the chat. If you guys don't have anything else, I think I'll just stay on for any questions if anything comes up. Or when does this go live again? So I will, let's see. I will get this recording. Oh, sorry, the application, September 1st.